The Supreme Court began this year poised to build on its 2022 decision to overturn Roe versus Wade. In fact, after that ruling, today, for example, one of the most restrictive abortion bans in the country goes into effect in Iowa. In January, though, the High Court took the extraordinary step of allowing Idaho to enforce its restrictive ban, but over the next 6 months, several twists and turns would change the course of that case. CNN Chief Supreme Court analyst Joan Biskupic is joining us now with an exclusive look at this. You got behind the scenes. Good morning. What can you tell us about how this changed when the ruling finally came out about Idaho?
Sure, Sarah. It's good to see you. And, abortion remains one of the most difficult topics for the Supreme Court and for the country, and is certainly an issue in the presidential campaign. We wanted to find out why the justices in January of this year allowed Idaho's very restrictive abortion ban to take effect, but then by June dismissed the case and essentially said, never mind. What we found out is in that first move in January of this year, it was a secret 6-3 vote. They never reveal how they vote. 6-3 vote with the Republican-appointed conservatives wanting Idaho's ban to take effect over the objections of the democratically appointed 3 liberals. Idaho's law is controversial because it has an exception only for to prevent the death of the mother, not for medical emergencies for her health. And the Biden administration was arguing that federal law protects women in emergency situations and would allow abortions in emergency rooms to protect her health, not just to avoid death. But what happened then by April, when the justices heard the case and then voted in another private session, that conservative supermajority started to splinter. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, in particular, was concerned about what was happening on the ground in Idaho. Women were having to be airlifted out of state when they had complications from pregnancies. Her arguments and her concerns convinced Chief Justice John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh to consider how to dismiss this case. But the problem they had was that 3 other conservatives, Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch, didn't want to dismiss the case. They wanted to keep it, and they wanted to rule for Idaho and its very restrictive ban. That gave liberals rare leverage. The liberals, as you know, Sarah, have only 3 votes on this court usually, and usually they cannot get their way for even some sort of compromise, but this time they did, working with those 3 conservatives at the center. They ensured not only that the case would be dismissed, but that original January order would be lifted. The justices at the center had resisted lifting that January order. They wanted Idaho's ban to stay in effect, even as the case played out in lower courts. But the liberals made sure that part of the compromise was that the Idaho ban would not be enforced in emergency rooms. So right now in Idaho, women don't have to be airlifted out for pregnancy complications. But Sarah, I have to tell you that this case will be back, not just potentially from Idaho, but other states are trying to ensure that Biden administration policy to protect pregnancy complications does not interfere with their restrictive state bans, Sarah.
Yeah, the Supreme Court left the door open. We know that President Biden were expecting to call on some big restrictions when it comes to the Supreme Court as well. We'll talk about that a bit later. Joan Biskupic, thank you so much for your reporting. Appreciate it.
Just minutes ago, one of the strictest abortion bans in the country went into effect in Iowa. Most abortions will be prohibited after 6 weeks of pregnancies, with some exceptions. CNN medical correspondent Meg Terrell is with us now. So what exactly is this ban in Iowa? What does it mean for people who live there?
Yeah, so there was a legal battle going on over this law in Iowa. It has now gone into effect literally at 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central, so about 20 minutes ago. This shortens the ability to get an abortion in Iowa down to about 6 weeks. So the law actually specifies that no abortions are allowed after cardiac activity can be detected on an ultrasound. So that is about 6 weeks of pregnancy. There are some exceptions to this law, like we see in other states. Rape and incest have to be reported to the authorities. That can be an exception. Fatal fetal abnormalities, if the fetus has a disease or a disorder where it's unlikely to survive. Miscarriage care, and preserving the life of the person who is pregnant, although proponents for abortion rights argue that those are pretty narrow exceptions. The Guttmacher Institute, which researches this issue and is in support of abortion access, says there are about 4,200 clinician-provided abortions in Iowa in 2023, to give you a scope of the number of people who would be affected by this. That includes mostly people who live in Iowa, but also some folks who traveled from Nebraska, where there is a 12-week limit on abortion. They had traveled to Iowa to get access. That will no longer be open to them. You can see that Iowa is joining now 3 other states that have 6-week bans, Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina, and 14 states that have near total bans on abortion.
Just talked to someone who talked about the fact that there's like a desert for maternal care in Iowa. I'm curious what the knock-on effect might be for outside of Iowa, since you said people were traveling into Iowa. Now what?
Yeah, this is really something we have seen when these bans go into place. They can affect the entire region. We saw this in Florida. If you want to look at the impact of just the number of abortions accessed in a state from a 6-week ban, we have data from South Carolina, where that happened in August of 2023. You saw abortions in the formal healthcare system decline by 71% in just the next month, September 2023. In terms of travel to nearby states, Illinois is probably going to feel the brunt of it already. We've seen data from Guttmacher showing almost triple the number of abortions from people traveling out of state into Illinois in 2023 from 2020. We also heard from abortion providers in Iowa. They're expecting Planned Parenthood saying they're beefing up their operations in Minnesota and Nebraska. There's going to be kind of a switch there because Nebraska still has up till 12 weeks.
And Terrell, thank you so much for explaining all that to us right now.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.